The SGSA has provided guidelines to steer sports venues towards compliance with government advice. However, compliance isn't enough. To maximise safety and avoid becoming a vector in the global pandemic, we must adopt a three-part strategy of reduce, manage and adapt. Evidence-based measures must be implemented to reduce the risk of viral transmission and prevent an outbreak linked to a sports event.
There's no one solution. Limiting capacity is an important baseline, but we also have to look at things like airflow, touch points, how people move through a facility, different behavioral aspects, and using technology to optimize processes.
Infrastructure epidemiology is a new discipline which combines the science of disease prevention with engineering.
Physical interventions we recommend include modifying payment and ticketing systems, contactless transactions, behavioral guidance, and optimizing building operations where possible.
All interventions must be monitored and analysed to determine their effectiveness. It's crucial to utilise available technology to do this.
Our technology monitors spectator movements in real time, enabling us to manage social distancing, capacity and access control, and ultimately providing a contact tracing capability. Managing your venue with confidence, powered by data, while reducing operational costs.
By undertaking analysis of monitored spectator behaviour at a venue, we can identify where applied strategies are working, and also where any hotspots for infection risk remain. Using our specialist modelling software, we can then test the likely effectiveness of potential improvement measures before their implementation.
Venue operators must be willing to adapt and learn as conditions on the ground change.
Even a change in weather can cause huge differences in the way that people behave and move through a venue. So using behavioural models, we can design practical interventions to help operators anticipate fan behaviours and plan accordingly.
There is also much we can learn from other sectors which have had success in reducing infection risk.
The aviation industry has led the way in the reduction of transmission risk. Global and regional regulators and trade associations have developed a common approach, and airports now have a global health accreditation program and also a common app where travellers can find out what to expect at their airport.
Sports venue operators are facing an unprecedented challenge. Adopting a multidisciplinary approach will ensure that we can reduce the risk for spectators while continuing to provide fans with the sporting experiences that they know and love.
How to get fans safely back to sports venues and events is quite simply the biggest topic in the industry right now. Laws, guidelines, attitudes and policy differ greatly from country to country, as we know, and sometimes between venue operators and their local and national governments. But if COVID-19 is here to stay, for venue operators and owners, minimising and managing the risk is absolutely key to drawing fans back to live sport. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to ponder some of those risk management strategies and examine what sports organisations can do to reduce them. You got a bit of a flavour of it there in the opening video. Delighted to say that we're able to do that here in the studio with a couple of live guests. Welcoming first James Middling, James Global Sector Leader Built Environment at Global Engineering Management and Development Consultancy Mott MacDonald. Bit of a mouthful, James, but welcome.
Thank you.
And Botan Osman is with us as well, CEO of Restrata, the Safety and Security Solutions Consultancy. Botan, good to have you with us.
Pleasure.
And we also have, delighted to say, a guest live on the line from another London sports venue. We're trying to get around as many as possible through the week. This time it's the Oval, where we are joined by the CEO of Surrey County Cricket Club, Richard Gould. Richard, good afternoon. Good to have you with us, Richard. Hopefully we can hear you shortly. James, let's get into the conversation straight away, though. We got a sense of it in the opening VT there. Paint a little picture of what the type of work that Mott MacDonald has been doing in venues of all shapes and sizes during this period with a view to working out how to minimise and manage risk.
Sure. It's a really interesting question because
you're trying to manage risk across a diverse portfolio of project types, but they all have something in common: humans and human behaviours. And when people travel through an airport, or we've been heavily involved with aviation and justice and sport in this space, and when people travel through an airport, they're trying to get through that place as quickly as possible to get to somewhere where they have more fun. And they're quite happy to be compliant and move through that space in a considered way. And justice, people pretty much so don't want to be there either, and they're very compliant and controlled. Sport, it's more like the difference of getting onto a cruise liner, where you feel the holiday work starts as soon as you enter the actual liner itself. And so people relax and their behaviours are different. So what we found is trying to implement first principles epidemiology to control, predict and manage behaviours is the real challenge. And that's where we've hooked up with Restrata as a way of monitoring and managing that actual behaviour of people.
So Botan Osman with us from Restrata. Paint a little picture of Restrata's role in this whole approach.
Sure. So I guess, look, our key focus is to ensure that technologies enables the management of the highly complex set of risks that fan return sort of scenario would bring into play. And ultimately our technology enables the management of whether it's a fan that comes in, whether wearing a dongle or via camera technology. I handily bought one of those here with me in the studio. This is an example of what we used with Surrey County Cricket at the Oval, where Richard Gould had the vision to say, well, within our trial, we'd like to have technology to understand how it can help with the trials and the fan returns that comes through. But ultimately, it's about giving a data-enabled way of managing fan return, which is extremely important, not only to manage the situation as it unfolds or the game as it plays out, but also afterwards to understand what learnings can I have from the situation that takes place, and also how do we make sure that next time we can improve that little bit more and that little bit more, so that you're kind of putting one success over another, and the only way that you can really do that is to manage the reality of the situation. I think the second element is, as you're managing a real-life situation of lots of people in one place trying to comply with lots of new rules, you've got to be able to have interventions that are immediate or at least timely, so that you can unfold a bettering situation as time goes by. And that's ultimately what we've invested our technology to be able to do for this situation.
It's a great introduction to Richard Gould, who is with us at the Oval. Good to have you with us, Richard. And as the CEO of a sports team, obviously, I would imagine nothing more important to you right now than working out how to get fans back to your venue in as safe as way as possible. To what extent are the data and insights that you have gleaned from these trials informing those decisions, obviously pending current government guidelines?
Yes, I suppose we've got two audiences that we're trying to satisfy. One is our normal audience that comes and watches the games in a normal state of affairs, and the other is the policymakers. We try to demonstrate that we can operate safely within the guidelines. And I think certainly with the Restrata technology, that was extremely helpful for us to demonstrate to both sets of audiences what could be delivered. Sadly, as of yet, in the UK, we haven't been able to convince the policymakers and the government that we can have crowds in, although there are a number of startling inconsistencies that do frustrate us. But in terms of audience, it was very good, and we hosted around 5,000 spectators across 3 days, 2 separate trials, and we're always keen to understand how they felt. They feel safe, and when we went out to them, we went out to all 5,000, and only 2 respondents said that they didn't feel safe. So 2 out of 5,000, I think, is an amazing number. And what it tells us is that if we can put in place this sort of technology and these sorts of measures, that people are very keen to return to watch sport, particularly perhaps in outside venues, and they're very keen to return now.
It is worth saying that this is a live session, so do get your questions and comments into us via the chat box that is just next to the stream. James, let me bring it back to you. There's obviously a technology piece here. As you alluded to, there's also the behavioural piece. How do those two marry together in your mind and in the work that you've been doing?
I think they're directly correlated, but really what we're trying to do is manage the risk, and that risk has got to be commensurate to the risk in the community. So if we've got a community that has a very high level of COVID infection, then you need to do more, and you need to manage those behaviours in a better, more considered way. If the actual risk in the community is lower, then you can relax and let the rope out and do different things. And so we found, if we take, say, the aviation example, we found the thing that made the biggest difference in aviation for reducing the actual quantified risk is hand baggage. If you don't carry hand baggage onto the plane, you significantly reduce that risk of transmission of the virus. And in stadia, it's a different set of behaviours, a different set of challenges, and you need to monitor the actual risk that you're trying to manage and quantify it and measure it. And the technology allows you to reduce the risk at source if you're controlling the quality of the air and killing the virus as it passes through the stadium, if you're reducing the actual microbial resistance of the actual surfaces you touch, and you're reducing the transmission through that. But then you're left with a residual risk. And that risk, unless you're measuring it and monitoring it, the performance of your interventions against that risk, then you're really just in the dark.
And obviously a key component here, as we are all finding out, probably wherever you're watching us from, is social distancing, and this concept of social distancing, which we're all trying to adhere to. Obviously, in a venue potentially like this, that is an incredibly challenging and complex thing to measure, I would imagine. So how should venue operators be approaching that challenge?
Yeah, I think you've got the theory. So the theoretical maximum number of people you can get in and maintain that safe social distancing. And that needs some modelling. It needs to look at the analysis of your pinch points. Is it your concourses, your stairs, your toilets? Is it the seating bowl, the vomitories? What is it for your venue? And you need to work that out. And there's lots of consultants in the industry that can help with that. But then you're left with this residual risk that you need to manage. And that's really the harder challenge. And that's what isn't really provided in the guidance. And that's what Richard's done so well and actively sees that grasp the nettle and work towards quantifying the risk. And then that allows you to actually modify, adapt and improve. But also you can imagine COVID isn't going to go away in the next few years. It's going to be a constant issue that needs to be managed for the next, at least 3 years probably. And so how are you going to have a conversation with the local authorities about how you're managing that risk and what your appropriate measurement is of that risk and your appropriate interventions? And I think that's really what the technology is providing.
Botan, did you, obviously from a technology standpoint, I mean, you hinted at some of the technology that you've introduced. Let's get a little bit more specific. What actually are we talking about? And again, for people who are watching who own venues, operate venues, how easy is this going to be to deploy at scale potentially?
So, two things there really. One is, how does it work in the immediate sense? And secondly, how easy would it be to actually scale up its deployment? I think ultimately, you mentioned social distancing. The most challenging part is to be able to have the monitoring required across your stadium to be able to manage actively social distancing. Almost impossible actually, because you're relying on a collection of people, perhaps stewards and other management, who are using manual technologies, maybe even CCTV, but essentially manual interventions that basically rely on an individual to figure out when am I going to intervene and when am I not. Do I do it in the first second? Do I do it 10 seconds later? 3 minutes later? You're leaving a lot of decisions across your stadium that are going to be distributed, which is quite a difficult way to do it. So what we found in the Oval and in other places, the way we've trialled this technology is that you can see live the exact location of a fan within the accuracy of 30 to 50 centimeters, and therefore you can understand when two individuals who are not in the same bubble or two bubbles are interacting within 2 meters for the first second, for the first 20 seconds, for the first minute, and then you get a trigger to kind of intervene at that time. The intervention could be somebody going into that location to make sure that there's a level of disbursement, or it could be something on the tag itself where there's a buzzer or a light or something that takes place. That enables distributed management across your entire venue. But the key thing here is that you're predetermining the decisions prior to anything starting. And you're relying on people to follow a certain standard operating procedure powered by the data that's coming in. It's no different to how we've been helping energy companies, for example, for the last 15 to 20 years, manage those risks that come about. It's doable manually, but it's inefficient and it's very unreliable. And the one thing that it isn't is kind of improvable. So I just had a pilot today or a game tomorrow. How do I make next week's game even better, and how do I make those scores lower? And I think the second point is deployment at scale is really what this thing's been designed to do in a number of other industries. And so the scale of a stadium is certainly something that's very manageable.
So we've got a lot of very solid theory there, and Richard, sort of part of your role is to turn that into a sort of practical experience and a valuable and good experience for fans as they return to venues. How does the information you're getting, the advice on techniques and approaches that that are being recommended to you, how does that sort of filter through your organisation at Surrey and to the venue operators and down to the stewards who will be ultimately partly involved in enforcing some of this stuff?
Yeah, and experience and enforcing are really key words because they don't often go together. And from the outset, and using the technology that was available, we wanted to try and make sure that supporters had a similar experience. There's no point bringing them into a venue that they're used to, that they enjoy coming to, and then providing an experience that they don't enjoy coming to. So, for example, stewarding numbers is key. In the first instance, the thought was that we needed loads of stewards. But actually, too many stewards just adds the number of bodies that you have within that particular area. And we were using the guidance from the Sports Ground Safety Authority that suggested that we could get around 30% or use 30% of any particular area. In fact, that number, unfortunately, was only around 21% after you had ensured there were enough seats between bookings. And that was because most people were coming in ones and twos. And I think you'll find that with football and rugby and cricket, many season ticket holders are in ones and twos rather than the fours and fives and sixes. Those groups would make it far more efficient in terms of using capacity. And so it's just important to make sure that we do deliver an enjoyable experience. We don't want an experience that people walk into and then suddenly they're barked at to do this or don't do that or wear this or don't wear that. We need to try and make it as natural experience as possible. And when we were doing these trials, it wasn't 6 to 8 weeks ago now, it was quite a long time. Things have moved on significantly even since then. The wearing of masks and all the rest of it feels very natural, whereas then it didn't. So for us, it's about maintaining the experience and making sure that we're still a place that people want to be.
And obviously, Richard, a fundamental part of the fan experience, we've often, leaders, heard from people in your type of position who talk about the fan experience beginning when people leave their house and only ending by the time they've returned home and navigated car parks and had a great sort of public transport experience. That is obviously now another sort of risk area, the journeys to and from venues, and whilst you in your role can't necessarily manage all of that exclusively, how are you working with key stakeholders, local authorities, we're in London, Transport for London, for example, to think about things like traffic flow and how fans get to and from the venue in a safe way?
I think you've hit the nub of the problem there. It's transport at the moment, which I think is restricting the policymakers from opening up the stadium. I think that and the fact that they don't want to do something which would be relatively high profile, because when you look at what we can deliver with technology and management, we can deliver far safer environments than those that are already open. If you go into a large shopping centre, 500, 1,000, 1,500 people wandering around, you don't know who they are, they haven't checked in, there's no understanding of where they've been. And so in the event that track and trace swings into action and it says, where have you been? And I've been to a shopping centre, well, they don't know who else went there. Yeah. And this is where sport has a significant advantage with the technology and the fact that everybody bought seats and allocated seats. We can provide that confidence, and so that we actually have an advantage over most other public elements that are now back in play. And I think these sorts of discussions will help us. And we've found some solutions. We found safe ways of operating, and we now need to be given the ability to reboot our businesses, albeit probably from a lower start base than ideally we would like. But we do need a start base, and at the moment we don't. And it does seem slightly bizarre that Tiverton Town can have 600 people around on Saturday, and yet the T20 final happened at Edgbaston in front of an empty audience with 25,000 seats that could have been available. We'd only used a small percentage of those, it would have been nice. So, I think there's lots of great work going on, but we also need to make sure that policymakers understand what can be delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd all concur with that. James, I know that some of the work that MacDonald has been involved in has been thinking about the bit outside the stadium, the bit outside the venue, how to get fans safely, and what's your sort of initial findings there? I know it's a sort of ongoing process. Are there solutions? Are there approaches that venue operators can take?
Absolutely. We've been working closely with leading mass transit providers around the world, and we've developed a new service that we call infrastructure epidemiology. And epidemiology is obviously the science of looking at the spread of infection and the control of that through evidence-based interventions. But it's very clinical and very remote to what we're sitting in here, the infrastructure of sport and everything that brings it together and supports it. So we've blended that with domain expertise of all the engineering solutions, traffic, demand modelling and travel issues to talk to people about how we can get more people through mass transit. And the appetite of people like Transport for London is absolutely immense to make this safe, make it happen and bring people to live sporting events in London as well. So that side I'm confident is actually in place. When the permission to actually open the venues occurs, we can get people here. But the challenge is this Zone X then, which I think is the relationship between the actual sporting club venue and the police authorities and the mass transit providers, that final mile logistics of what the fans do to safely get to the stadium and what they shouldn't be doing on that route.
Botan, I want to bring you in to talk a little bit more about the technology. What are we looking at here in terms of the technology? How advanced is it? Are there big leaps in the technology you think still to come, or is it going to be much more about smaller incremental improvements?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. There's quite a few elements to all of this, and some of what we have deployed it has been tried and tested in other industries for other use cases. And so none of this is, I would call, experimental. I'm sure over the coming months and years there will be some things that may be termed bleeding edge in terms of advancements, but right now what we're proposing for the management of the fan return scenario is tried and tested, but certainly in other industries. I think that's one. I think I think Richard touched on a really important point, which is that the advantage that sports venues have, which is it's a regulated environment versus an unregulated environment, which might be a shopping mall or a shopping centre. And that's a huge advantage because you can potentially put some control points in place that there is a plus a sort of a social contract between the spectator that is coming into the venue to watch the match versus or the game versus what the venue expects of them. We saw that at the Oval when we ran the trial. Spectator experience was really important, and actually none of the spectators actually pushed back, and it was optional. Push back on using the lanyard technology in order to attract them. They essentially want to come and have a great time, and it's kind of a wear and forget. You're not asking for any other obligations. So I think from a technology perspective, what's being proposed today is not only being tried and tested in other industries, it's been trialled within the sports world as well, and it's ready for deployment. But I'm sure what will come will be further and further integration with advanced ticketing systems, with further camera analytics work, etc. And that will come with time. But I think what's being proposed now is essentially ready for deployment.
A couple of questions coming in from people watching. Alex Rowe, nice to see you, Alex. Thank you for joining us. Asks a very pertinent question about clubs and venues proactively. Do you think clubs and venues are proactively preparing their venues for the return of fans, or is it simply to meet the criteria that is being set out, or may well be set out by DCMS and the SGSA?
I think that's probably an impossible question to answer in many ways, because the guidelines have come out from the SGSA, fantastic, really solid, really evidence-based and clear. But then you've got to interpret those into your venue. And I think a lot of people have been doing that and keeping very busy working out how many people theoretically they could get into their venue. But the guidelines that are coming out of the government are changing on a daily basis in every part of life. So really, I think until we start to quantify the risk from first principles of what it is in your venue, and then you can demonstrate that to the local authority, you're going to be flexing in the wind as the guidelines and the requirements keep crystallising.
Should you say the SGSA for international viewers, the Sports Grounds Authority? Safety Authority, nearly.
Which also have an international version of that document now about to be launched.
Absolutely. Richard, there was a question that came in as well that I want to throw to you, and in fact it's just gone off my screen, so I'll ask another question, which is around the expense of this. Obviously this is a financially challenging moment for all sports teams, all sports venues. Obviously you're going to take no chances in terms of safety and security, and but you know, in terms of deploying some of this technology, how much are you factoring that into your sort of future budgeting process that you're trying to do at the moment, which I know is, again, probably an impossible task?
Yeah, it is difficult because we just want to get back to some degree of normality, and building a business case for that is a challenge. That's why the SGSA work doesn't help to an extent, because we could only get it up to 21% capacity, and if we roll that out around the ground, 21% is fine as a starter, but there's a big gap between 21% and 100%. And we only start getting towards commercially viable levels once you're north of 70%, and at the moment there is no policy route to get us from 21% up to 100%. That's where we need some assistance. The Sports Ground Safety Authority, well named, but we need to make sure that we've got some policies that will actually keep sports grounds in business as well.
Thank you very much, Richard. Final comment from you, James, on this, because we're just about running out of time. There's obviously a huge amount of work going on, and you're working, as you said, across various sectors. We will have a lot of smaller venue operators watching us as well, all around the world. For those type of venues where there is, ever more of a budget challenge, what's your sort of one piece of advice to them in terms of the maximum they can do with the minimum investment?
Yes, I think it's the same for whatever scale club or ground you are, that you're looking to reduce the risk. So reduce the risk, better cleaning protocols, better fan behaviours, make people aware of what they should be doing, walk through that journey for every fan demographic. And some of those interventions are expensive. They're technology, they're changing HVAC systems, they're doing things that cost a lot of investment. But other things like just changing the way you clean your stadium and the way that people move through it are actually zero cost. It's just doing it in a more hospital-like manner. And then when you've reduced that risk, it's really measuring and monitoring. And you can do that with people, and you can do it with your existing cameras and technologies, or you can bring in the Restrata high-end solution that's going to do a lot of that hard work for you. And that depends on the scale of what you're trying to measure, really. And then it's looking at the effectiveness of what you've just implemented against how you could adapt and keep improving and moving forward. And then go have that conversation with the police, with the emergency authorities, and with the local authority about what they think. And that's really in the gift of every club.
Well, look, we've run out of time, but it's a good point on which to end, a good bit of practical advice, I think. James, Botan in the studio, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Richard, we wish you and Surrey all the very best, and all the team at the Oval there. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us.